Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Margaret Pinard, and I'm a historical fiction and fantasy author. Here is my YouTube channel. Welcome to Booktube. I am going to be doing a Wednesday wrap-up today, and just to let you know, I am pre-recording this because I may be busy on Wednesday morning, so I didn't want to be distracted, but I will be in the chat for sure, and so I'll be talking to you while you're watching me from 2 days ago. So if you can wrap your mind around that. On this channel, I like to do wrap-ups. I like to do book tags. We'll do some of those next week, and like fun topics. So if you have any of those that you'd like to see on the channel, feel free to suggest them. I've got 6 books for you today, and they range from Climathon always to mystery and decluttering and all this stuff in between. So hopefully you'll find something you like today, because I had some really good reads. In fact, some that I read in one day because I couldn't put it down. So that's also going to be a future video topic. I thought that would be a fun one. So welcome, settle in. I hope you are all comfortable to listen to this Wednesday wrap up of books. I'm going to start just in chronological order and go through what kind of books, where I got them, what they were for, why I picked them up. So let's start. I'm going to start with this one. This is Seek You. So this is a chunky book. It's a graphic novel. It's by Kristen Radke, and the subtitle is A Journey Through American Loneliness. Now, this is nonfiction, so I'm not sure this really qualifies for the graphic novel, because a novel is not nonfiction, but it's pretty cool. There's lots of neat art and lots of interesting factual details that she's discussing. So I came to this, it's obviously a library book, because I was trying to find a graphic novel book for Mr. B's Readathon, which is hosted by Chaotic Bibliophile on Storygraph. I had 3 more, so now I have 1 more book to read to do that whole accomplishment. So that's pretty cool. But what did I think of this book? So I don't read a lot of graphic novels, but you need to like the style to really enjoy and be captivated by it. These are some of the styles. It's pretty cool. It's the author illustrator is pretty talented. I like the ideas that they had. It seems pretty like literary fiction, if you get what I mean. Like the art seems a little stark, a little stylized, a little, I'm making a statement that I really maybe didn't understand. So sometimes it related to the background of the text on the page. Sometimes it was just sort of a suggestion or random. So I was just paying attention more to the science. There's a lot of good research in there. But the collection of the research was basically like the author's personal random ideas. I saw this, so I looked into it. I noticed this, so I dug a little more into it, which made it interesting. But in the graphic novel format, I found that I hold on to things less when I'm looking at art and small comic book blurbs rather than text. So maybe that would change if I read more graphic novels, but that's not really going to happen. They're much too expensive. And yeah, so I was interested in some of the quotes. So I'll share some of the pieces that I found interesting. And there's a biblioserendipity moment. So here's some of the facts that I thought were pretty interesting. So talking about loneliness, talking about science experiments, psychology, and everything. There's this little piece. If we're going to maintain our position within a group, which is to say, fed and warmed and less likely to be cornered by bears without backup, or left off the coworker text chain arranging 5 p.m. drinks. So she's comparing the left outside the circle with the bears, or left outside the circle with the cocktail hour. We need to feel deeply troubled when we observe minor social shuns so we can correct our behavior. So she's pointing out that our evolutionary behavior is such that we have behavioral cues to say, oh, we need to we need to change our behavior to be in the in-group because that keeps us safe. And so she's just sort of drawing these parallels between bears and, the Slack channel or whatever. I thought that was interesting. I've got another piece here. Ooh, the loneliness, the male. You may have heard of the male loneliness epidemic, and I won't go into it too much here, except to say that she brings up a lot of examples. We've got McNulty from The Wire, Ern from Atlanta, Elliot from Mr. Robot, Rick from The Walking Dead, and Don Draper from Mad Men. And she's pointing out that all these men could be perceived as lonely, but they really have a choice to come back into the group, and they want to be outside the group. Almost all of his actions are laced with a disinterest in others, but this is the important part. It implies superiority. And only when a man is superior to others is his loneliness meaningful instead of pathetic. I thought that was really interesting because some people could use, well, men are lonely too, to refute the argument about everyone's lonely. We need to do more community and activities like that. But then you say, well, you're reading the situation in a different way, right? If you're using it to feel superior as a man, you're pushing yourself out of the circle. And so that's your own fault. We need to look at the things that influence these situations. I thought that was a really interesting observation. Another one that relates to other things. Once someone enters a prolonged period of loneliness, they may move into a state called hypervigilance, in which they become especially attuned to rejection, anticipating or imagining it even when no rejection occurs. Everyone is perceived as a threat. And that's the page art that's associated with that one. And I thought that was interesting. We talk about hypervigilance because of other issues, threats, but for it to be a psychological source of loneliness and rejection, I thought that was an interesting mind tweak for me as well. There were a lot of experiments, unfortunately, with rats and monkeys in this, or chimps, I guess, some kind of monkeys in this book. And so I would definitely say trigger warning if you're interested in the topic, but don't want to hear about sad animal experiments. The anterior cingulate cortex works to surveil conflict. So when it senses pain, it's reacting not to the pain itself, but to the distress that pain causes. And this took me several times of thinking around to figure out what it meant. But basically, anticipating pain gets your stress response up. So maybe the anterior cingulate cortex is about monitoring that stress response. And since other things in our environment now cause that stress response other than pain, it's like beep, 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 like a Dalek. So, and we'll hear about that part of the brain in another book, in a biblioserendipity moment. Here's another piece. All of life represents a working out of the cost-benefit ratio of cooperation versus aggression. And she cites John T. Cacioppo in Loneliness, Human Nature, and the Need for Social Connection. So she's got sources, folks. And there's, again, the art, in case you like this style. And that just made me think of basically my own head. And when I am thinking about, do I go out? Is it worth it? Do I go to this social function? Is it worth it? And I thought it really is a cost benefit ratio. I hear about friends who are like, oh, do I want to leave the house? Is it really worth it? YouTubers might be able to relate. I think I've heard that recently. And so, yeah, that was interesting to find quoted research. And then a couple more. When our presence is not enough to cure a person of their loneliness, it may create a kind of transferred loneliness in us, because the lonely person is essentially saying, you are not enough for me. It can be difficult to be around people who are in pain, harder not to internalize or feel dampened by it. So this is really interesting because I think we've heard as a common sense thing that when you are lonely, it sort of spreads. It can not be infectious, but spread out in the group of friends or whatever. And this is why, because you're saying something when you act lonely. So, I mean, I need to work this out more, but that was an interesting way of framing it. And I wanted to think about that a bit more. I don't know if that clicks for anyone else. And then finally, the intensity of my loneliness at 33 is unmatched to what it was when I was lying in bed with the radio at 9 or 12 or 15. Though now it is much deeper and I understand its cost. So it's interesting thinking about someone who is living through this like modern technological age of change and isolation and thinking about loneliness in different eras and when did it feel deeper and when did it feel um, how did it feel different? It's just sort of an interesting exercise. She begins the book with talking about how her dad would go on the roof and have like a radio, amateur radio, ham radio, something or other, and he would just like be throwing a signal out to see who is there. And it's this sort of desperate bid for connection in the Brene Brown language. But she did the same thing in ICQ in the chat rooms when she was growing up and realized that much later that, oh, I was doing a similar thing to my dad. And she only heard that from her dad's brother later in life. So a really interesting and thought-provoking piece, but again, not really the style of art that like I would be drawn to, and definitely a personalized collection of things to notice, not like a thesis. So interesting. And yeah, I read it for a readathon. I don't know. I maybe give it a 3.75 stars. Some other people could find it meshes with their interests much better, but I did get a good amount of thoughtful information from the book. So next we have Make Space for Happiness by Tracy McCubbin. And if you've been with me for a while on the channel, you know, number one, I do a lot of nonfiction, but number two, I also try a lot of declutter books and organization books because I've got a lot of stuff and I just try to make it so that when people come into the house, they don't feel overwhelmed. They feel comfortable and cozy and, you know, maybe a little cluttered, but not like hoarding level. So I'm trying to like make it look nice. This book I picked up new for Independent Bookstore Day when I only had 30 minutes and I dashed in and out so that I could make sure to support an independent bookstore. This is the one that caught my eye. And I liked it because it promised a little bit different of an angle on decluttering, right? So Make Space for Happiness is her second book. She's an organizer in the LA area. And she talks about the different emotional needs that a person is trying to meet when they have different types of clutter. So I think she gets at both why we accumulate and then keep, and also how, because the how is different, and then it'll help tell us what is behind the emotional need. So I think that's really useful. For me, it was pretty thin. It was pretty quick read, and I definitely I mean, I wouldn't say breeze through it. I think there were definitely some important things here I want to think about more. But it seemed more of a breezy treatment of pretty deep issues. So there's a couple pieces where I was going to look back and like try to think about it more, maybe journal about it more because they might be part of my life, right? But I would have appreciated like maybe discussion questions or thought questions at the end of the chapters to see like to help guide the reader through, okay, if this is your thing, if this is why you're reaching out, if you want self-respect, if you want connection, if you want self-reliance, or these different sorts of things, how can you think about it differently and maybe meet that need elsewhere? She goes into it with some examples, but it's just like one. So I think I need the lesson a bit more drawn out. But it was really good, very simple language, and in contrast to CQ, not personal in her choice. Like it was very not clinical, but very breezy Home and Garden Network produced kind of presentation. So that's all I have for that one. It was Source Books, so I do like the Source Books publishing brand. That will always tilt me over into the I think I'll like it kind of territory. Next, we have Love Saves the Day by Gwen Cooper. And this is Gwen Cooper's second book, I believe. Pop that over here. I got this as a used paperback. And of course, there's a cat on the cover with a bunch of records and boxes, which is pretty indicative of the plot. But also, there's a cat POV. There's a cat character who gets to talk to the reader, which worked really, really well. Sometimes you'll see mysteries where they have, I don't know, a sheep detective, and you're like, how could that possibly work? And then it is, and it's really funny. On the back of this one, someone called this book poignant, insightful, and laugh out loud funny. And I would say definitely, definitely. The cat POV worked for me. The poignancy, I would say there's a trigger warning for grief in here for sure. But the laugh out loud funny just is the sugar that makes it go down easy, right? I read this one in a day, maybe. There's a very complicated mother-daughter relationship, which is the focus of the book. The mother passes away towards the beginning, and basically the daughter has to come take care of the cat. And that is the sort of growth arc that we're looking at. She's looking back in her life, reflecting on things that happened and how they could have gone differently, or how she could have reacted differently, and how she's going to live her life now. And she's with her husband, and there's some friction because of the economic situation, the financial situation. And Prudence, the cat, lands in the middle of all this, and has some things to say, has some opinions. And I just really, really liked it. It made me cry. There were some parts toward the end that definitely made me cry. And that's the poignant part. Like, really, really well done. It's also set in New York City. So that was another plus for me, is that the modern day relationship, modern day, contemporary, doesn't really matter. But the part they're reflecting on that affects the characters in the story is the 1970s New York City's Lower East Side punk and disco music scene. So if you're a music lover, there are a lot of music references that went straight over my head, especially for the 70s, because the mother was a DJ, and then a record store owner, and then the mother's best friend, who's sort of a tertiary character, who is in a punk band, and they were best friends, whatever. So people will probably really like that. What I liked about the New York City situation was that it talks about one of the big events, and it has to do with gentrification on the Lower East Side, and like how people deal with that and the tragedy of it. So yeah, it was a really thoughtful treatment, and I really loved her writing. It was very, like I said, funny and poignant, and that's just a powerful combination. So would recommend, 5 stars. So good. So good. So that was a good one. I will pause in case I have questions to answer in the chat, but normally I would do this live, and I'm, as I said, doing it pre-recorded so that I can pay attention to something else on Wednesday morning that I need to. But yeah, I'm in the chat. So hello, everybody. Okay, 3 down, 3 to go. The next one I have, which I also read in a day, was The Case of the Missing Maid by Rob Osler. I am remembering to switch to the banners on this, but just a little belated. So this one I picked up and read. Actually, it was 2 days, but it was the day I bought it. So I don't know. Sometimes the stars just align, right? Oh, did I forget to do the brain serendipity thing? I did. Brain serendipity. Okay. There was one thing. Let me go back to this one. There was one thing in here that was interesting enough for me to highlight. And you may remember in CQ, I talked about the anterior cingulate cortex, which is the place where you monitor conflict. And in Making Space for Happiness, there's a quote. It says, for example, studies have found that women's fear center, the amygdala, is more easily activated, leading us to be more likely to ruminate over what's gone wrong in the past. And we, women, have a larger anterior cingulate cortex, which is the part of the brain that helps us worry. And that's all they said about it. So not only is the anterior cingulate cortex the part that monitors conflict and stress response, and so it's like reading all over stuff, but women have a bigger one. So it's not going to go into more detail here because that's not the subject of the book. But I just thought that's pretty funny that there's this part of the brain that's mentioned twice in 2 books that I read back to back. Okay, so back to the mystery. I picked this up at Bishop and Wild, which is a LGBTQ owned bookstore, and it is a LGBTQ plus mystery. So it's right up my alley. It's a historical mystery. It's set in Chicago, 1898. So it's got a little bit of that Newsies flavor. There's bicycles, there's bloomers, there's orphans. So you can see why it sort of like rung a bell with my Newsies brain. So this is a used hardcover, which is a great deal to pick up. I liked the local research that they did for Chicago, and then they just did a really nice job of using the sort of secret lives of the LGBTQ community in that time frame, as well as incorporating the immigrant lives. So we have basically a firm of detectives that are not Pinkertons. They're competing in much more respectable, let's say, in this time period. And this young woman is trying to be take care of her ward because their parents died, and she's trying to keep the apartment, earn enough money to keep her brother and herself cared for, right? So instead of this typist job, which isn't really covering the bills, she wants to become a detective because she thinks that's pretty cool. And she knows she's different. She has these thoughts of being with women instead of men, but obviously you can't say that just to anyone in society. So she joins this firm. Someone gives her a chance, which is a very big sort of we'll give it to you sort of starting assumption. And then that's what the action is set around. So our detective woman is the bicycle bloomer laden little detective there, and she goes all over investigating things basically against the wishes of the people at the agency who don't want her to succeed. So that's pretty standard. But very action oriented, lots of interesting things. The investigation that she's allowed for 1 week to try to pursue takes her into a Polish neighborhood. So she meets this immigrant family and gets involved in the community. And there's lots of like little, not, I guess, name drops maybe, but like things that I recognize because I have also studied 1890s Chicago. And so I appreciated those, but they might not be as interesting to other people. But yeah, just a great little mystery, and didn't guess it. I'm not really good at that, but probably good for people who like mysteries and go through them, one a day kind of thing. Do recommend, and if I see another Rob Osler, I would maybe pick it up. So I'd say another 3.75. Like, I liked it well enough, and other people may like it more or less than I did, but historical mystery fans would recommend. And we have June, which is Pride Month coming up. So if you want an LGBTQ plus book, this is involving lesbian as a main character. So she was a great character. All right, 2 more to go. This is Sinister Graves by Marcy R. Rendon. I've had this one for a little bit. It's a pretty slim volume, a mystery, as you could tell by the title. And I have not read Marcy Rendon before. So I had not read any of these people before. I picked it up at a thrift store. So it is an ARC, which you're not supposed to resell, but thrift stores will send them. And it is an Indigenous author and an Indigenous mystery. So crime novel. I definitely wouldn't say there is action and danger in this one, but it's closer to the cozy side, whereas this definitely has more, not gore, but like scary suspense, tension, and like death. So yeah, just be warned, like they're very different flavors. So this is set in Minnesota in the 1970s. Content warnings for mental health issue stuff, religion, cult stuff, and missing or murdered Indigenous women and girls are involved in the plot here. So before it was a thing in the 1970s in terms of the name nomenclature, but definitely while it was already happening. I really liked that there was a close third POV. We're in the mind of this tough character named Cash. The series is called Cash Black Bear. It's the main character. And I thought that would be a guy, but it is a woman, a young woman. She's probably like 20 years old. She's come out of the foster system with a lot of hard knocks, but she's landed in a situation with kind people and like the possibility to grow. So she's basically like been thrown up on a beach and trying to get a hold on life, right? Metaphorically, there's no beaches involved. But she is trying to get a hold on life. She's going to school. She's got a good mentor in this police officer. And he asks her to check something out, and it becomes sort of a thing. There's a lot of driving in this, a lot of smoking, a lot of beer drinking. So, 1970s sort of background. But I loved the tone of the main character, and we're in her mind. So her processing of things and her unique laconic style of speaking were really humorous. So I think while there is a lot of serious stuff being discussed and shown, there is a really interesting point of view, and I really like the Cash Black Bear viewpoint. So definitely would pick up another Marcy Rendon and another Cash Black Bear series book. So 5 stars. What else did I have to say about this? I think that was it. Oh, and the author is White Earth. I don't want to say band, nation. And the character is part of the Ojibwe, and she doesn't really know. She thinks she comes from the White Earth Nation, but there's different places where she visits and is kind of on the outside because she was in the foster care system instead of growing up on a reservation. So we get a bit of that viewpoint, which I thought was really interesting. So highly recommend Marcy Rendon's Sinister Graves. And then my final book is my Climathon book here, and that is going to be The Water Will Come, which is by Jeff Goodell. Now, I've read another of Jeff Goodell's books. He's a reporter writing books. I read The Heat Will Kill You first, and I thought that was really good. So his style is such that he goes around and talks to people. He has actually an interview with Obama on his trip up to Alaska, and he has a picture of it. And what's funny is I went to follow Jeff Goodell on Blue Sky, and he had a anniversary picture of the trip where he interviewed Obama, and it was like, oh wow, 10 years ago or 11 years ago or something. And his caption on the recent tweet or Blue Sky message was another time, like another era or something like that. Like, yeah. So this book is 10 years old, but in the same way that I really appreciated the facts and analysis that came with a lot of books that came towards the end of the 20-teens, it's still valid. It's still important. It's still urgent. It's even more urgent, in fact. So The Heat Will Kill You first dealt with heat and the effects that we will have of heat. And this one really dealt with sea level rise, which is going to be caused by glaciers melting, which I told you a little bit about in On Time and Water. You can go back to my last wrap up for that. But also thermal expansion, which is the seas getting bigger because it's warmer and water expands when it's hot. Elemental science. I do know that. So I really liked this one. This is another 5-star book. And I have lots of stuff to go through that were interesting pieces. So bear with me. I'm going to be reading from the book a little bit here. Let's see. His style is a lot like Elizabeth Rush's. So he goes to a lot of different locations around the world, which I really liked because sea level rise is something that's going to affect a lot of coastal areas as well as upstream areas. So coastal areas are going to be prone to flooding, of course, but also upstream areas will be prone to salinization. Basically, their freshwater resources becoming salty and life dying because of that. So there's a lot of places that will be affected, and he goes from city, urban to rural and developed and developing nations to get a real range of experiences and issues and what people are doing about it. So this is less about actual science details and like IPCC meetings and reports, and more about what is the city doing to plan? What is the lawsuit that's coming up in this county about this road that keeps washing out? What is the what are the developers planning for? What are they admitting to? All this kind of really interesting background. So he's talking a bit about the historical context when he's in southern Florida. Miami, of course, is a big one. I also talked about another book, which is Miami, the Disposable City by Mario Alejandro Ariz. I think that's his name. And so that was a great book that really like opened my eyes to Miami. I haven't been to Miami. It's not my community, but the issues will be similar in other places. And Carl Fisher, historically a person of interest in Florida because he developed it. More than any place in America, South Florida has been an expression of the technological dominance of 20th and 21st century life. It is a world created by dredgers, cooled by air conditioning, powered by nuclear energy, dominated by cars, sanitized by insecticides, glamorized by TV and the internet. It is a place that has been habitable only if you believe the premise that nature, the heat, the bugs, the alligators, and most of all, the water can be tamed. So that's a good sort of dun 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 precursor dramatization for the book. In Miami, an awareness of what's to come is slowly percolating through the consciousness of property owners and real estate investors. For people who own a house or a condo, it mostly takes the form of a question: should I sell or not? Can I get a few more years out of this place, or should I dump my condo on the beach now? And what came to my mind when I heard that was, who are you selling it to as well, and at what price? So there's sort of a, I don't know if I would say moral dilemma or ethical dilemma. I'm not clear about the differences. I'm sort of using them interchangeably here. But if you are selling to someone who has no other choices and you're not getting a good price, that sort of balances out because they need something and are not paying a lot for it. But if you are selling to someone in bad faith and you're getting a high price, like your market value when you bought it kind of thing, because they don't know or they're not being told all of the dangers, the perils of the location, like flood area, then I think that's a real bad moral move. But yeah, should I sell or not? I'm sure someone has treated this in like a New Yorker essay or something, Atlantic piece. If some of you know where I could find someone talking about this issue of when to sell and what the sort of hazard, the moral hazard of that is, please drop it in the comments below. I'd be very interested. Okay, they went to Venice. Mr. Goodell, Jeff went to Venice and talked a lot about why it's different, why it's similar, what they've done. There's this huge sort of quagmire of a project that is trying to put basically controllable walls under the water and deploy them when necessary. And I was like, that's so interesting. I don't know why it's so expensive, but it has taken a long time and a lot of money has disappeared. And then later he talks about London, where there has been action on this as well. There was a 1953 storm that devastated the Netherlands, which also sent a surge up the Thames into London, inspiring the British to build a barrier to prevent it from happening again. The barrier became operational in 1982, one of the first examples of a big retractable gate to be built. It has a Star Wars look to it, with rolling gates that open and close as the tides rise. And thanks to rising seas and increasing storm surges, it is being put to use more and more often. It was closed only 4 times in the 1980s. As of this writing, which is 2017, it has been closed 75 times since 2000. So 75 in 20 years. So an uptick, basically. And I thought, wow, I've never heard of that. He doesn't mention what it's called. I guess the Thames Gate. And I'm sure in another 10 years, it's gone up, skyrocketed in terms of usage. Maybe it's even having problems. I didn't look that up. But if people in the London area know anything about the gate that is for storm searches, I'd be very curious if it's in your news or you hear about it, or if it's reliable, if there are people putting up a stink about it. So let me know. Okay. Here's a really interesting one. A place in Okay, so we know New York City is very vulnerable. We had Hurricane Sandy, we had the subways that were flooded, all this kind of stuff. And they're talking about Hoboken, New Jersey, and it's built on former wetlands, of course, so it's very vulnerable. To protect the city, Mayor Don Zimmer supported building a big U-like barrier along the waterfront. The problem is, to protect the city, the wall has to run in front of the lofts, which are luxury lofts, with prized views of Manhattan. I'd rather flood than stare at a wall, one Wall Street analyst who lives along the waterfront told me. Zimmer, who during a recent walk through the city was obviously frustrated by the politics of the debate over the barrier, had proposed routing it through an alley behind the luxury lofts. The new route would leave about 35 buildings, some of the most expensive real estate in Hoboken, exposed to rising waters and storm surges. If they don't want to be part of this, they can take care of themselves, Zimmer told me. And I thought that was the appropriate, saucy response, right? Of course, there's probably differing opinions in those luxury lofts, but like, what a point of privilege for someone to say, oh, I can throw away this luxury loft. It's not essential to my survival. So you go ahead and build your thing behind me, and I will just write off this when it floods and when it's a total disaster. because I'm not part of the community here. Like, what an asshole. But yeah, like the mayor saying that, I was like, you go. People. Short range, long range, you know? Let's see. We talked about New York City and New Jersey. They also talked about Norfolk, Virginia, which I did not know. I knew it had like a military base, but there's like a lot of military infrastructure there and it's all at sea level. So it's all going to be underwater. It's already flooding in 2017. So like what is it like now? And yeah, how is the military allowed to plan for that in this administration? In this administration? So like if anyone's got the deal on that, drop it in the comments. What's happening in Norfolk, Virginia with the bases? The next quote is also reflecting on a historical thing that I've studied. Let's see. We're talking about Paris negotiations, and back in John Kerry was Secretary of State. Oh, yeah. Okay, so we're talking about the Paris Climate Accord and the negotiations. It was broadly agreed that developing nations had a moral right to compensation for the damages they suffered from climate change. There were many predictable attempts to sabotage any deal. Hilariously, negotiators for Saudi Arabia, which ranks as the world's 15th largest economy, demanded that if islands like Kiribati or the Marshall Islands, were to be compensated for damages, the Saudis should also be protected from loss of future oil income. I will let that sink in. Saudi Arabia, which has profited off of selling oil, wants to be compensated if they have to slow down selling oil at the same time as their actions have produced enough sea level rise for other island nations to be underwater. Where's the money supposed to flow in this situation again? You know what it reminded me of is in the case of abolition in the UK. When you finally got abolition, the deal that was worked out was not to compensate slaves who had had their time and freedom and family choices and everything taken from them for hundreds of years. When they abolish and acknowledge that slavery is reprehensible, they don't make reparations to the slaves. They make reparations to the slave owners. Okay, well, if you have to give up having slaves, then yes, you should be recompensed because that's property and you invested in it and you're not voluntarily, giving that up. So we will give you a market value of what that person's labor would be. And it's like, excuse me, which way is the money supposed to flow here? It's just ridiculous, right? The persons who were involved in the reprehensible activity are the ones that are going to be compensated. Yeah, I'm glad that he put hilariously in here because I'm glad that we've evolved from the 1820s thinking to now. Maybe not. Let's be honest, maybe not. All right, so there's so many juicy things in this book, so many good pieces. Oh, here's an ironic one from where we're standing today. Because this was in 2017, right as Trump took office the first time, and he's talking about migration, of course, and climate refugees, estimating what's happening in the future, what's happening now in 2017. As a rough estimate, the United States has been granting lawful permanent resident status to only about 1 million people a year for several decades. Under President Trump, who made it clear during his first weeks in office that refugees of any sort will not be welcomed in the United States, that number is sure to fall precipitously. Fall. We're going to be deporting thousands, hundreds of thousands, because we've got our head up our ass. Okay, so there's that. And then here's a lovely turn of phrase that I particularly appreciated from Jeff, page 198. In Virginia, much of the head in the sand attitude toward climate change can be traced to the political power of the fossil fuel industry, especially big coal. Dominion Energy, the state's biggest electric power company, is also one of the biggest coal burners in America. I should put this up so that I know where I am. In fact, 95% of the power used on the base is from Dominion, the base meaning the military base, which means that the U.S. Navy operations in Norfolk are largely dependent on coal and natural gas. For the sinking base, it's a kind of fossil fuel-assisted suicide. Brilliant. No notes. That brilliant. So I loved it. it's the small things. And then here's another little bit of irony. We could look forward and predict it. In the not so distant future, the Bering Strait, the 50-mile wide gap between Russia and the United States off the coast of Alaska, could become a strategic choke point in global trade, like the Strait of Malacca in Asia, or, let me hear it, the Strait of Hormuz in the Persian Gulf. Ding, 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 ding. Where have we heard that name before? All right, so we're talking in the last chapters about the long goodbye, disaster relief. That is how disaster relief works in America. There are lots of incentives to rebuild, but few incentives to rebuild differently, much less to rethink the long-term futures of cities and towns along the coast. So this is when they were talking about some places in New Jersey, and like I said, the road that keeps washing away, it's to a luxury park. And I think there's just one more comment where that comes into account. But yeah, disaster relief, FEMA, flood insurance program. There's lots of pieces that need to be overworked. And of course, they're not being addressed right now because the administration has its head up its ass. But yeah, disaster relief, rebuilding incentives, and it's worrisome. It's stressful. How little people are encouraged to, or indeed can decide on their own, to think more long-term than short-term. That's what I'm taking away from this. And as an example, there's this little town. What is the town? Forget what it's called. Is it Tom's River? It might be a different one than the Jersey Shore. Property. Oh, wait. Old A1A. Summer Haven. Where is Summer Haven? Florida. Okay. It's in Florida. They have this town that used to be only accessible by boats, and then they filled in a lot of dirt to make it more accessible. They put in a road. The state serviced the road until it got too expensive and said, fine, county has to service it. County obviously has less money and can't service it because it washes away every few years because of climate change. And they sued the homeowners in the luxury area that had this road, sued the county for not keeping it up enough because they can't afford it. And the county won, but then they got it appealed. And then the next place somewhere in the state reversed the verdict. And so, to state it more bluntly, this means that property owners in Florida can invoke the Fifth Amendment and sue their city and town every time a road or bridge washes out due to flooding. Not because the road was poorly designed, but because when it was built, engineers failed to anticipate sea level rise, which is ridiculous. So, especially in a case like this, where it's not a disadvantaged community, my thought was, why can't you levy a fee for that special road? Like, I know the idea behind an assessment or taxes is that you distribute the cost so that like not everyone is paying for one thing themselves, but like this used to be a community that was only accessible by boat. So like, why don't they just go back to that? Because unless you want your whole city to go broke because they can't afford to pay for the road and you have no services, how about you just take care of it yourselves or change how you come and go? So no patience for that. No patience for that. Okay, and here's the final sum up from The Water Will Come by Jeff Goodell, which I'll leave you with. People will notice higher tides that roll in more and more frequently. Water will pool longer in streets and parking lots. Trees will turn brown and die as they suck up salt water. Then a storm will hit, and it will push an astonishing amount of water into the city. Some people will move to new, higher buildings. Others will simply move to higher ground. Roads will be raised. Solar panels will bloom on rooftops. Abandoned houses will linger like ghosts, filling with feral cats and other refugees looking for their own high ground. Water will continue to creep in. It will have a metallic sheen and will smell bad. Kids will get strange rashes and fevers. More people will leave. Seawalls will crumble. In a few decades, low-lying neighborhoods will be knee-deep. Wooden houses will collapse into a sea of soda bottles, laundry detergent jugs, and plastic toothbrushes. Human bones floating out of caskets will be a common sight. Treasure hunters will kayak in, using small robotic submersibles to search for coins and jewelry. Modern office buildings and condo towers will lean as the salt water corrodes the concrete foundations and eats at the structural beams. Fish will school in classrooms. Oysters will grow on submerged light poles. Religious leaders will blame sinners for the drowning of the city. Journalists will arrive on float planes and write about the return of nature. And if that doesn't describe the setting for Salvagia, a recent novel that I also read and enjoyed, whew, yeah. So there we go. It is a bit doomy, but you know what? Like, we need to realize that is what is unfolding to do anything about it. So let this galvanize you. I will be doing a best of Climathon reads. I have 12 reads, I think, coming up in a few weeks. So stay tuned for that. Yeah, 5-star book. I would love to meet Jeff Goodell. That would be really cool. And so we'll have a Climathon sort of best of coming up. I think I will be doing a haul video to talk about the books that I got in California so I can finally put them away. I'm trying to keep them in a pile so I don't have to hunt them out again. And yeah, so lots of good stuff coming up. I will leave this up as my last piece. And what are you reading? Tell me in the chat. I started Hannah Arendt's On the Origins of Totalitarianism, the Library of America version, and I'm like 60 pages and already got this many tabs. So it's going to be a slow, dense read. That's fine. Not a slow, dense read is this library pickup, The Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping by Sangu Mandana. There are pieces where it's like, oh, okay, I read one of hers before and really enjoyed it. So reading this is like a companion piece to totalitarianism. Then I've got one that I picked up new, The Living Stones Cornwall by Ethel Colquhoun. So this is a painter from the 40s who was part of the Surrealist movement and then branched off. Obviously an original thinker, and she spent a lot of time in Cornwall. So she wrote some pieces about the superstitions and myths and supernatural things in Cornwall, including the stones. So it's sort of a classic, and I thought I'd bring that out and enjoy it because I'm going to Cornwall, y'all. And then finally, also new, bought with the Cornwall book from a new bookstore, first time I went, is Rebecca West's Radio Treason, because I figured I could use a little primer about propaganda. This is Rebecca West, who I've never read before, but is described in the introduction as a predecessor of Joan Didion. I didn't really get into Joan Didion when I read a little bit of her stuff, so I really like Rebecca West's writing. And this character is known as Lord Ha Ha. He was a propagandist British person who was working for the Germans on the radio. So if you've heard of him, you know who I mean. If you don't, it's this whole World War II betrayal, basically. So his treason trial is what Rebecca West is writing about. It's pretty fascinating. It's not that long, but she's going into a lot of interesting aspects. So enjoying that piece by piece. So we've got totalitarianism, treason, supernatural stones, and witches. So what's not to love? It's a great combination. And I hope you guys are having some fun. Biblioserendipity. Maybe it's related. Maybe it's on the opposite ends of the spectrum. But wherever you are, I hope you are taking care and reading happily. Don't forget to diversify that reading shelf. And happy Wednesday, everyone. Let's see it through to the end of the week. And I will talk to you again soon. And I will leave a little bit of time in case I have to finish up the chats right now. All right. Peace out, everyone. Take care. Bye.